This podcast is brought to you by Shift Management's Supervisory Leadership Certificate course, where online learning and live web coaching bring out the very best in frontline and middle managers. Move from operations to management thinking and develop the skills for leadership, reaching your company goals at the same time. Check out our Supervisory Leadership Certificate course on the shiftworkplace.com website today. Hello, Culture and Leadership Connections podcast listeners. Today, I have a wonderful guest. Her name is Dr. Karlyn Borysenko. She's an organizational psychologist and the founder of Zen Workplace, as well as the chief science officer of Rallybright. She works with teams all over the world to build better work experiences. She's an organizational psychologist and executive performance coach. She is a leader in integrating mindfulness strategies at work to increase productivity and creativity, reduce stress, and create better work experiences. She is based in the greater Boston area and serves clients all over the world. She holds an MBA and a PhD in psychology, is an experienced trainer and facilitator, coach, and award-winning speaker. Karlyn is a contributor to Forbes and the author of Zen Your Work, Create Your Ideal Work Experience Through Mindful Self-Mastery. I first discovered Karlyn because I fell upon her website and then I started to follow her and everything she had to say was so good. I ended up being on one of her events, which was a summit. And from there, I just kept on thinking, I've got to get this lady onto our podcast because she is awesome, everything that she does. So Karlyn, welcome and thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, well, thank you for having me and thank you for the wonderful introduction. I was blushing a little bit over here, I have to say.
So that was just the official bio, but please tell the audience a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Yeah, you covered a lot of it. I'm an organizational psychologist. I work with people all over the world to help them integrate mindfulness strategies into their work experience, and not in the traditional way where we think about mindfulness in terms of meditation. I think meditation's great. I think everyone should do it, but there are a lot of things that you can do with mindfulness techniques that have nothing to do with meditation and are more about how you're seeing the world, what stories you're telling, and how you're interacting with the people that you work with. So I teach people techniques in relation to just their own personal work experience, how if they're managing people, how to do it well, if they're developing into leaders, how to really do that from a place of doing the inner work that's required to be a great leader. So it's a little bit about what I do.
That is great. And I think that people need this because they often think that being mindful requires a long period of meditation that they're never going to be able to master. And they don't realize this is something they can practice in the workplace daily.
Yeah, absolutely. That's actually one of the biggest challenges that I have with getting people into mindfulness is immediately they think I'm going to tell them to sit down and meditate. How I've explained it to people is meditation is like step 12 of this, right? There are so many things that you can do before that. Now, I do want to emphasize, I think that meditation is a fantastic practice for anyone to get into. It really is a game-changing thing. But if you're going into it thinking that meditation is so hard, I'm never going to be able to do it, you're just really going to struggle with it. And so I like to give people techniques that they can use really starting from the moment they learn the technique to start shifting the way they're interacting with their work experience, whether it be you learning when to recognize when they're under stress, learning how to do deep breathing, learning how to change their perspective in their head if they're having a situation with, say, a difficult colleague and it's really frustrating them and causing them a lot of anger, how to deal with that well, how to change your working relationship with that colleague. And there's so much you can do that are almost deceptively simple strategies to really start creating a much more positive work experience, because we spend so much of our time at work. There's absolutely no reason why we should have to be miserable and frustrated and stressed out in the process.
Wow, I'm totally sold already. Would you mind telling our listeners one of those deceptively simple strategies that you mentioned?
Yeah, so I think breathing is actually one of those deceptively simple strategies, because breathing is something you can literally do anywhere in any situation. And what it is, just make sure you sit up straight in your chair, you have both feet firmly planted on the ground, uncross your arms, uncross your legs, kind of open up your body a little bit, and then take several really deep breaths in through your nose. Kind of be very mindful as you're tracking the breath down through your lungs and into your belly, holding your breath a minute, and then releasing it. And doing that a couple of times can really calm your whole body down. So let's put it into a practical situation at work. Say you're in your regular team meeting and there's that one guy in the team meeting that always has to get up and say something and have a bad contribution to the meeting or talk about things that aren't working and really maybe poo-pooing on an idea you offered, and you start to feel angry, you start to feel stressed out. Well, one option is you could go off at the guy in the meeting. That's probably not going to help you meet your goal. But the other option is maybe just take a few deep breaths, calm your body down, clear your head, and relax yourself before you start the interaction, because you're going to probably make much more intelligent decisions when it comes to that interaction if you just take a minute and relax your body in the process. And, the example I always like to give for people, I don't know if you've heard of Orange Theory. It's like this workout program where you wear like a heart rate monitor. And so you're actually watching your heart rate when you're working out, when you're in this program. And one of the things the coaches in Orange Theory always tell you is if you want to slow your heart rate down, you have to slow your breathing down. And that's not just true of when you're working out. It's true when you're in any situation, and it can always be applied at work. So just take those few deep breaths, slow your heart rate down, give your body a chance to just relax a little bit, and your head is going to be in a much better position to be able to manage the situation effectively.
That is a great and deceptively simple technique, because people always think, oh, I'm breathing anyway. They don't realize that when you are conscious about some aspect of your breathing, that it has such a huge effect. And it has a demonstrated scientific physiological effect that people can feel immediately in their bodies. So they know that it's true. It's not that you're just making it up.
Yeah, absolutely. Another deceptively simple technique that I really love, and people feel a little silly when they do it sometimes, but make yourself laugh. Just make yourself laugh out loud. Think of something funny that really made you laugh. Watch a funny video on YouTube, but have like a good big laugh for a couple of seconds. And really what it does is it actually releases endorphins into your body, and it really calms you down. There was a great video. I did it at the Sure Annual Conference last year where I made this big group of people laugh, and I put the video on LinkedIn afterwards. And it was just, you could see that these people just like, they were relaxing when they had that little moment together, even though they didn't know each other. This was a random group of people, but they all shared that experience, and it was something you could tell made them feel really good.
It's important when you think about babies. I mean, the first thing they do is be able to focus their eyes and see something. But the second thing they do is to smile. And the third thing is to laugh. Like, that's what they do. And they have these deep belly laughs where they just go crazy laughing. And it's so engaging. And everybody loves to watch babies laugh. We need to laugh. I think it's part of our DNA.
Yeah. And especially think about it when you're having like a bad day at work. What if you just took a couple of minutes, shut the office door so people don't have to hear you, and just laughed out loud for maybe 10, 15 seconds? It can really be something that can change the entire course of your day based on just a very simple action.
This is great. So let me go back a little further since I mentioned babies earlier. Can you share a couple of incidents from your childhood that you think made you into the person you are today?
This is a tough one for me because everyone has struggles when they were a kid, and I won't say that I have the worst childhood on the planet, and I dearly hope my parents never actually listen to this podcast now that I'm thinking about it. But, if I'm honest, I really struggled when I was a kid to be able to express myself, to be able to feel comfortable saying what I wanted to say, to the extent that I really didn't talk a whole heck of a lot, probably up until I was in college, to be honest. I really didn't say all that much because I didn't get a lot of positive reinforcement when I did speak. And so I think that learning to overcome that, learning that expression is a gift and is something that I should be doing more of. It's something I still struggle with today, but it's something that is definitely very much influenced who I am today, because I'm very big on people saying what they think, owning what they say, not being afraid of the reactions of other people. And even though these are things I still struggle with, they say sometimes the best way to learn something is to teach it, right? So I guess that's part of the path I've gone down.
Learning to express yourself, a lot of people struggle with. And I'm glad that you brought that one up. Can you think of a specific incident where you felt it was difficult to express yourself?
I have a hard time remembering a lot of my childhood. if I'm honest. So I don't know if I can give you a specific incident. I will say that in my household, when I expressed myself or when, I was happy about like good things I was doing or things I was proud of, I would always get a little bit of punishment from my parents. It was almost like, don't think too much of yourself. We're going to slap you down a peg or two. And that happened very, very consistently throughout my childhood.
Okay. From the groups that you were born into, what would you say has most influenced your sense of culture and your sense of self as a leader? Because you really are a leader in the industry and also in the online coaching. What are some of the things that those groups that you were born into have brought to you that made you into that person you are today?
I had a tough time with this one too, because it's hard. I think, you think about the groups I was born into. I mean, I'm white, I'm a woman. I came from a middle class background. I mean, we didn't have a lot, but we had a lot more than other people. I came from a really small town, so I did not live anywhere near a city growing up. I think probably the thing that influenced where I'm at today most, ironically, because I didn't actually appreciate this about myself up until the last couple of years, is being born a woman. I always thought men had it so much easier when it came to leadership, because they could do things that I perceived that women didn't have the freedom to be able to do or weren't going to be as accepted doing. But I think that that's actually one of the things that has influenced me most recently in regard to defying the stereotypes that I believe exist around what women can achieve, how women are perceived. I think that's actually the thing that's influenced me the most, is saying, sometimes it's helpful to know general statistics about the groups that you're born in and how those things are perceived. But isn't it much more interesting to be able to say, what, this may be true for a lot of people, but I made choices that did not impact me negatively in this regard, or I was able to go beyond what the expectation was. Perhaps that's how I would say it influenced me.
Mm-hmm. I think we're always on that path of understanding where our influences come from. It's a constantly evolving trajectory. But what I'm thinking of is, for example, you are American, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's affected you. You're born in a small town. Every small town has its own culture, and there must have been that. There's also ethnic group. So you might have been born into a particular ethnicity, whether there's a language attached to it or not. Language, there's religion. All of those are cultures. Age group is also a culture. You may have been born into a cohort of a certain age group that, for example, being a baby boomer, in my case, has a certain influence on who I am and how I do things. Do any of those strike a chord with you?
Well, not really, because it's like, perhaps I'm just a contrarian. maybe that's the best way to look at it, because as I was thinking these different groups, I would not say that any membership in those distinct groups really had any sort of definition or role in defining who I am today. I mean, if I think about, American perhaps, because I think, certainly we have our culture. So maybe that one of being able to go after what I want, maybe the American dream, if you will, being shown from, an early age that even if you come from, I won't say I came from incredibly humble beginnings, but we didn't have a lot. Being able to know that you could go and work hard and go to school and make something of yourself, perhaps that one. But for the rest of them, I didn't actually grow up with a specific religion. I consider myself highly spiritualized now, but I did not have religion in my household growing up. In regards to, my background, my family's mostly French. There was a little bit of a language thing in there, but I wouldn't say that had much to do with it. I think that in many cases, I've kind of bucked what you might stereotypically ascribe to people from the groups I was born in. And so maybe that's a theme, is that I'm a contrarian to a lot of these things.
Yeah, or that you saw what was around you maybe as a person who didn't belong and wanted to follow your own drumbeat.
I think that's a very fair analogy.
So from the groups you chose to belong to, because obviously you chose to belong to academic areas of your life because you went to school and you have several degrees. You also chose to be a psychologist that has its own culture, and people are also very much formed by their hobbies. For example, people who run, people who play the violin, those kinds of things. Groups that you chose to belong to. For example, if you're married or have lived a long time with a partner, you have joined their group, whether you like it or not. You may feel like you belong to a greater or lesser degree, but you are there and it influences you. So can you think of any of those that you think you've adopted or that you've taken into who you are?
Well, I mean, it's actually funny because I married an immigrant in in the US. He's from Ukraine, and he actually has completely bucked his background as well. He does not want to go back to his country. He very much has bucked a lot of the things there. And I think that might be actually part of it. I think that the groups I choose to belong to, certainly there have been influences along the way. I think that and perhaps this came from how I was raised too, is I was always taught by my family to go after education. And probably that's why I went to college and that's why I went to graduate school. I actually worked in higher education after I graduated from college as well. So education was very readily accessible for me. So I would say that has influenced me, but again, not in the way that you might expect, because even when I was working through my PhD, oh my God, and I'm sure you can relate to this, Marie, like I hate academic writing. It's awful. And I think like the temperament that you have to be a full-time academic it's something that I would never actually choose to belong to, because I just think that it's so crazy. I think that belonging to academia for a little while showed me is more about what I did not want. Because I think that we learn a lot about what we want by contrasting, by trying things out and saying, okay, this is something that I like. This is something that's contributing to my experience. This is something that I do not like. It is not contributing to my experience. Higher education for me, I think what I appreciated coming out of it was that I had the background to understand the theoretical underpinnings of what I was working on. But in terms of being involved in that culturally, no, that was an area where I said, I want to get as far away from being an academic as possible, which is how I built my business, how I built, my social media stuff and all that is actually a direct rebellion against academia. For other groups that I've been a part of, I think the spiritual groups that I'm a part of have probably been the most influential for me in regards to how you perceive your experience. What is our purpose to being here? How can we take responsibility for our actions in regards to creating the experience we have while we're here? That's probably been the most influential for me in terms of not only my work, it has had a very profound impact on my work, but also just in terms of as a human being, knowing that I have much more control over my experience and I can always make the choice to make different decisions if I want a different experience. That's come directly out of the spiritual groups that I'm aligned with. So that's probably been the most impactful to me and my leadership style. The other thing that it talks about a lot is in terms of being of service to other people, giving of yourself to other people, lifting them up, because in my spiritual beliefs, I'm you, you're me, we're the same thing. How I treat you is a reflection of how I see myself and how I'm treating myself. And so thinking about the leadership philosophy, it absolutely plays a role to be able to say, if I'm treating you badly as a leader, that's a reflection on me. That's a reflection on how I see myself. And that's something that I'm going to want to change, because obviously I don't want to treat myself badly. And so that means, why would I treat you badly in the process? Does that make sense?
Yep, it does. So name some of those spiritual groups that you're talking about.
In the spiritual worlds that I'm in, it's not like an organized religion. So it's not as though, there's no leader of the groups. There's no pope, if you will. But there are certainly different communities. I mean, I've worked with shamans in South America. That's had a very profound experience on me. I've done retreats with Dr. Joe Dispenza, who does a lot of meditation retreats and, actually working with people who are healing things with meditation. I've had very profound experiences there. I work with a coach. He takes care of the spiritual side of things and make sure that I'm on the right track there. I mean, I do actively meditate in my everyday life. I meditate every single day of the week. And so that's a part of my practice. And I guess the last thing I would offer is one of the most profoundly influential authors and books for me is a book called Conversations with God by Neil Donald Walsh. And I think that pretty much reflects the thing that has probably had the most influence on how I see the world and how I interact with it.
Thank you. It's really helpful for people to have those specific examples, because that way they can think, well, how would this apply to me? And what would I be interested in from what Karlyn does? Yeah, that was great. You were born with a temperament, right? And that temperament doesn't change, although the personality changes as you evolve and add experiences to it, as you just mentioned. But what would you say is your temperament, or some of the characteristics of your temperament that affect how you see the world?
Can you give me an example there?
So, for example, I have a grandson who just can't stand for people not to be included. Since he could crawl, he was trying to connect with people. And now he's 2.5. even though he's still going through the mind thing, he still brings everybody into the circle and he won't eat until everyone's there. It's just part of who he is. But other children, I have several grandsons, and another one of my grandsons is just very reflective. And he waits a long time before he interacts with anybody. And then when he says something, it's really profound and thoughtful. And so those are two indications of temperament. So his temperament is quite different from the temperament of the little guy that has to have everybody in the room all together, all engaged as a group. So what would you say are some things that have to do with your temperament that are part of who you are?
Yeah, so I think probably the most pronounced thing is that, and this is a little ironic given what I told you about my childhood and not really expressing myself, but when I did speak, oh my gosh, like I am way too much of a truth teller sometimes for my own good. And this is something, and I didn't realize this until I did a lot of reflection about my childhood, but it's one of those things where I can come into a room and kind of like assess a situation quickly and, know sometimes almost way more intuitively than I should what's going on in the interactions between people. And I remember doing this when I was a little kid too. And I would always be the one that would call BS if I saw it. And sometimes for better, sometimes for worse. But I being a truth teller is something that is absolutely part of my temperament. And being a person sometimes to say the things that other people are more reticent to say is absolutely true.
I would say that you're also someone who's able to connect people to what they need to hear without them backing away from it. So from the times that I've heard you engage in interviews or work with groups, because I have heard you quite a number of times, you're very kind and inviting. So
thank you.
You might tell people something someone else could say that they would not take it, but the way you say it is kind and thoughtful. I don't know if you've noticed that, but that's what I thought. You may see something in blatant reality, but you don't dump it on people in a way that they want to run right and scream.
Thank you. That means a lot to me. And I think that that's actually part of the second aspect, which is personality, right? Because I wasn't always that way. Once I found my voice, I'll tell you, I got myself in a lot of trouble early on in my career because I didn't know how to communicate what I wanted to say in a way that was going to be productive. And in fact, that was probably one of the impetuses for me starting Zen Workplace was coming to this. Well, I mean, I'll say it, like I took a DISC profile like way back when, I don't even know, 15 years ago or something. And when I saw my DISC, and I love DISC now, this is when I first started dabbling in DISC, but what that profile showed me very clearly is that I was pissing a lot of people off.
So before you go any further, DISC is a personality inventory. You want to just tell people what that is in case people don't know?
Yeah, DISC is a psychological model. It's been around for a really, really long time. It was actually invented by the same guy that invented Wonder Woman, which I think is kind of neat. He was a Harvard psychologist. And it outlines 4 distinct aspects of personality, and it tells you which ones you are more likely to gravitate to when you're not trying, right? So anyone can do anything that anyone else can do, but sometimes it takes a little bit more effort for us to do those other things. Like, if you're an introvert, it maybe takes a little bit more effort for you to go to a networking event and you're going to need a nap afterwards if you do, because it takes more energy. But there are things that we naturally gravitate to that don't really cause us to use that extra energy. And that's what DISC is going to tell you. For me, my DISC profile basically said, you are a leader. You are the person that is going to come in and try to lead the situation, but you can also be very challenging and maybe sometimes a little bit too argumentative and a little bit too blunt. It didn't say that verbatim, but that was kind of what it was telling me. And so I looked at those results and I said, oh my God, I don't mean to make people upset. I don't mean to make them mad, but that's clearly what I'm doing. At that time when I took it was very reflective of the work experience I was having. And I would, get into these challenging situations where maybe I said something that was absolutely true, but I said it in a way that was just not effective. And that pattern came back to bite me over and over again. And so over time, I made a very concerted effort to change how I was speaking to people, how I was communicating these things. And listen, I don't always do it perfectly, but what you've seen now is the reflection of, probably over a decade of effort to really change that and make sure that not only was I saying things that were true, but I was also saying them in a way that people were going to be more receptive.
Well, I can certainly identify with that. I didn't have that capacity either. I would just say it like it was, straight from the hip, and without realizing how much pain that was causing to people.
Mm-hmm.
And when I realized that I was causing them pain, I felt terrible about it because I did not want to cause pain. I was just unaware that that's what was happening. So I think that effort to be diplomatic, to be kind, to say things honestly and with love took and still takes a huge effort for me. It's not that I don't feel it. It's just that it doesn't come naturally.
Mm-hmm. Oh, no, we're fighting that same fight because there are times, and listen, again, I'll be the first to admit that I am not perfect. Sometimes especially when I have a lot going on and I'm stressed out, sometimes I might just lose it and say, no, here's what you need to know. This is what it is. It usually tends not to work. Maybe I'm going to feel better for like a minute when I say it, but it doesn't always.
But it could have years of negative repercussions for that 1 minute.
Yes, and sometimes it does. Sometimes that instant gratification is not worth it. But I think there are a fair number of women specifically who struggle with this issue of really not intending people to perceive anything negative, of having the very best intentions when they're saying it, of just trying to be very logical and to the point with it. And oftentimes it just takes tweaking how you're saying it to really get the result you're looking for.
Totally. Well, that brings me to my next question, which is sometime that you became aware that your understanding of the way you saw the world was completely different from other people's. And you've already spoken about that, but it's like it's a culture shock experience. Often it's related to an incident or a specific thing that happened that just surprised you. And you went, whoa, I didn't realize that this is how people experience life. It's completely different than me, or that they're responding in a way that I was not expecting. So can you speak to anything like that?
I think for me, the thing that stands out the most was honestly my freshman orientation at college.
Mm-hmm.
Because I came from a very small town. I graduated high school with like 48 people in my high school class. Mm-hmm. Like it was very, very small. It was very hegemonist. Like everyone looked like everyone else. I went to school at Boston University, and I remember my freshman orientation, like being in the dorms with all these people from all over the place. And most of them, to be honest, like come from very wealthy families and had a lot more than I did, and frankly, like much better education than I did. And it was very much a culture shock for me at that point. And I was like, oh my God, like the world is nothing like what I thought it was. And so I'm really grateful that I did take that leap and go to school in a city and be around people that were very different from me, all diverse walks of life, because it really did open me up to see that the world is not the way my parents taught me it is.
Mm-hmm. That reminds me of actually somebody else that I interviewed for a different project, and she's an accountant who was Indigenous, and she grew up on a First Nations community, and she went to school in a small town. And then when she went to university to do her accounting degree, she said the whole world and the universe opened up for her. It was like everything that she had known was so small and so insignificant, and seemed that it didn't matter anymore when she saw that everything was completely different than what she thought it was. And she could go back into other circumstances and feel that she could be herself more because she wasn't so constrained by the immediate circumstances around her. But it's very common for people coming from a small town to a large city, or vice versa, to experience shock over a period of a couple of years even. They just feel they don't know what's coming next, and everything feels really odd to them.
Yeah, I was very lucky in that someone I met, I think it was my sophomore, junior year in college, he was much more worldly than I was. It was probably the first time that I had anyone tell me, just because you come from a certain place, that doesn't mean that's what your life has to be. You can make whatever you want to happen. So I was lucky to have that influence at a relatively young age, and that definitely did follow through. Now, of course, after college, I moved back home with my parents and kind of backtracked for a couple of years, but the influence was still there.
Mm-hmm. So I would just want to ask you a little bit about this Rallybright. What is Rallybright, and how did you become the Chief Science Officer of Rallybright?
Oh gosh. So in the work I do with Zen Workplace, oftentimes I have partnerships with different organizations that have different types of assessments that I can use with my clients. And Rallybright for me was one of those partnerships. It started off where the CEO of Rallybright reached out to me on LinkedIn one day, and you probably get emails all the time like this where he was like, "Hey, I developed this tool. I'd like to show it to you. Would you be open to it?" And I got to tell you, like most of the time when I get those emails, I completely ignore them because if I did every demo of every single tool, I would have no time left to do anything else. But he happened to catch me at a generous moment. I was like, sure, I'll look at your tool. And what he had built was an assessment of team resilience in organizations. And it was such a smart assessment. And it was developed over the course of 15 years, pulling data from places like Microsoft, LinkedIn, GoDaddy, all sorts of really big name companies where he was able to develop this with his founding executive psychologist, who is now, she's still involved with the company, but not really as much. And so I saw this tool and I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. And at the time, I had been doing a lot of employee engagement surveys for clients. I had never been the biggest fan of your traditional employee engagement survey for a lot of reasons. But what I saw in the Rallybright assessment was that it was not only looking at how people felt about their work experience, asking those traditional employee engagement questions, but it was also looking at what are you able to achieve as a team based on how they feel? What's the actual progress or productivity or outcome of the team? And it combined all those aspects together into one. And so I was like, this is amazing. I'm in. I totally want to start using this with my clients. And I did. I started using it right away with a couple of my clients and had really great results and just had a really great rapport with the CEO. And eventually he asked me to come on board in a more official capacity. And I was happy to do it. And it's a little bit of a balancing act for me because I still do have my own practice and do my own work, but I just love how Rallybright has approached team resiliency, and it's been a pleasure to be a part of it so far and been able to really start to build out the tool and make it very, very usable for managers and leaders at any level of experience. And so it's been a really fun process to go through.
I'm going to have to look that up and see what it is. Is this, what does it cost to use? Or is that a loaded question?
No, it's not a loaded question at all. It's really simple. The cost starts at $200 per person for a year, but there's a minimum team of 25 people to get started. And what you get for that is a resilient teams assessment. You can do any of the assessments as many times as you want. The resilient teams assessment, we recommend people do 2 to 3 times a year. We don't like waiting for a full year to do the assessment because we want the team to be able to see where they've made progress, where they're still struggling, that sort of stuff. So that's included with it. There's also a whole suite of individual personality profiles, which I always find really compelling. We do actually have a DISC profile. We have an individual conflict style assessment. We have burnout assessments. We have a performance environment assessment. So lots of great tools to help managers become better leaders and to help build better, higher performing teams and organizations.
And so they get access to all of those as the result of the $200, or do they have to pay extra for them?
Nope, everything is included, and you can run as many teams and as many assessments as you like.
That could be very useful to a lot of people. Thanks for clarifying that.
Sure.
So we're reaching the end of the interview, and I wanted to ask you if you could just tell the employer, this is how I like to work, and this is how I would be best for your organization. What would you say?
To an employer or to a client?
Yeah, to an employer, not to a client. I mean, we could talk about a client too next, but as far as, so if you were in the position to be employed or to be brought on as a partner, you would probably want to say something about how you work best and what you need to do that and how you can be a part of that organization. So how would you explain that?
I'll take this in the form of like my biggest pet peeve from working with anyone. And that could be an employer, it could be a client, it could be anyone. And that's when they stop sharing information and stop treating you like a partner. And I'll give you an example because this has happened to me many, many, many times. You're communicating, you're working on achieving a specific goal. All of a sudden, the people you're working with go radio silent and stop answering your questions. Or maybe it's not even that severe. Maybe they just stop telling you information that they know that could be really helpful if you knew it, but weren't in a position to have it. There's just like a lack of information sharing, a lack of communication, a lack of, perhaps it's just a matter of not being open and transparent in what's going on. And that's probably the biggest thing that really irks me, because in any work I do, the more information I have to work with, the better. And when places go out of their way, sometimes it seems, to hide information or to not tell you the full story, to not treat you like, you're a full-fledged part of the group, it makes it very, very difficult to achieve your desired end result. I'll give you a really real-world example that happened to me a couple of years ago where, I was working actually pretty internally with an organization. And because I was coaching a bunch of people in it, I would find out information that the CEO of the organization was specifically withholding from me. That other people knew, that really, like, this wasn't an ego thing. I was mad because I was like, oh my God, in coaching these people, this would have been so helpful for me to know. And I think the biggest thing is, don't be afraid of sharing information, even if you don't know if it's relevant, because it really could make a difference in what people are working on. That is my absolute biggest pet peeve. If you want people to be part of a team, you have to treat them as though they're on the team.
Well, it's trust and it's respect, really. If you don't trust the person that you hired to do the job because you're withholding information, then why did you hire them in the first place?
Yeah.
It's also a slap in the face as far as, did you just hire me because I'm a smokescreen, or do you actually want something to happen here? But I often find that people in that position of the CEO who's withholding information from you, they have some hidden fear about them having to change. And it's not so much about them sharing information. They're just scared that they will have to do changing. When any contracts that I have go south, it's usually because the decision makers realize that in order to sustain the change, they're going to have to actually make changes themselves, and they don't want to do that.
Oh my gosh, truer words have never been spoken, right? Everything is fine, well, and good until you ask them to change. They're like, no, I don't need to change. All these other people need to change. But I think, just kind of going back to how I work best, I do not work well in environments where I'm not trusted and I'm not seen as a partner in the situation. And, change is always hard for anyone for so many reasons, not necessarily because people are afraid of it. But, I think that that's really one of my deal breakers at this point. I know enough to know that I can go places where people are going to value me and want my input, that I just don't have time for places that aren't going to get their act together in that regard.
Yeah, who does, really?
Yeah, life is too short.
Exactly, yeah. So, is there anything else you'd like to say or promote? This is your spot.
Excellent. So I think the thing that I'm really excited about right now is I've launched an online community that's totally free for people to come and join. We're going to talk about different aspects of work, everything from just your individual work experience and how to make that better through different techniques, to how do you effectively manage people, become a great manager, like the best boss they've ever had. How do you develop that inner leader that's really going to inspire people, get them on your team, that sort of stuff. People can find out more about that at zenworkplace.com. I also have a podcast that is a really fun podcast. I'm super excited about this. It started just as a tweet that I sent where I was sitting in on this panel at a conference. It was a panel of chief human resources officers. And I was just sitting there going, oh my God, every time I'm in one of these panels, they all say the same thing. No one's being authentic. This is all spin. And so I sent out this tweet saying, I just want to have a series of really authentic conversations with people about the world of work when we aren't putting that PR spin on it. And I got such an overwhelmingly positive response to that one tweet that I was like, oh my gosh, now I actually have to do this. So that's my podcast. It's called No BS. You can find out more about it. You can go to zenworkplace.com. You'll get a link from there. You can also go directly to nobsatwork.com and you'll be able to find all the episodes and all the conversations up until this point.
I love it. Yeah, it's the no BS theme has been going through the whole interview and your whole life, actually. It's like, say no to BS. Let's just have authentic, real things happening, and ain't nobody got time for that other stuff, right?
Yeah, that's what I'm trying. And, it's funny because oftentimes people don't think of that when they think of like the mindfulness person, right? They think I should be like all Zen and like a monk. But for me, part of what I like is really knowing and just feeling very comfortable in, again, that expression, that another theme that we've talked about, and being able to really say what you want. And I think part of that is absolutely from the meditation, from mindfulness, because I've been able to develop a level of comfortability with myself and with what I have to say and with what I have to give the world and what I have to share, that I tend not to really care what other people think anymore. And it's all going to turn out just fine. So
Wait, comfortability? That's a new word. Let's add that.
Oh, I'm not even sure is that a real word. I don't know. Maybe I'm just making things up.
It's a good one. I like it. Comfortability. The ability to have comfort with something.
Yeah.
All right.
Regardless of what other people think.
Yeah, we could put it into wiki definitions or something.
Sounds good.
Well, Karlyn, thank you so much for this interview. It was lovely. I really enjoyed it. I hope you did too.
Yeah, it was a ton of fun.
And I know that our listeners will also really get a ton of value out of it because the things that you have to say are so useful for people. So thanks so much for joining me today. I really am happy that you were able to be a part of the Culture and Leadership Connections podcast. And I look forward to checking out your No BS at Work podcast too.
Thank you so much, Maria. I really appreciate it.
Today's guest, Dr. Karlyn Borysenko, had a lot of useful insights that I was happy to share with our podcast listeners. But what stays with me particularly is how Karlyn used her natural tendency to speak her truth and get to the heart of the matter to focus her talents as a career and workplace coach into a successful business. She also learned in the process that surrounding clients with a sense of safety helped them to speak their own truths. Make sure you check out her website, Zen Workplace, and that you add her podcast, No BS at Work, to your listening list. I hope you enjoyed this interview as much as I did. Thank you for listening, and may culture and leadership insights continue to guide and inspire your day. Newsflash! Did you know that we have a Facebook page and a Twitter account called Work and Culture? Great insights, podcast release information, and links to useful downloads all available there. Have I got a great surprise for you? It is our Future of Work 3 stellar articles that will explain how you can stay current and skilled now and in the future of work. We have 3 pieces to this. It's a free download called The Future of Work, and in part 1, I talk about how people and machines came to be in relationship together and how the gig economy affects everything. In part 2, I talk about the relationship between Industry 4.0 and emotional labor and what you will need as far as skills are concerned in the tech and soft skills for the future. And in part 3, I talk about a 2020 vision for the future of work, which is going to help us move forward into a future that is kinder and more oriented towards humanity living in relationship with its environment, along with some very practical suggestions for how to get there. I know you're going to love it, and you can easily download it by going to this link. The link is shiftworkplace.co/future of work white paper. Let me say that again. It's shiftworkplace.co/future of work white paper. Grab your copy today, and I would love it if you get back to me and let me know what you think.